So Geno Smith in 2024 had a very productive season for the Seattle Seahawks. He broke the franchise record for passing yards and completion rate. He threw 21 touchdowns and 15 interceptions in 17 starts. And the Las Vegas Raiders, after bringing in Pete Carroll to be their new head coach, said, we want to compete right away. So they traded a 2025 third-round pick to the Seahawks. They acquired Geno Smith last month. And they say, you know what? Let's make this a little more long-term. So they reach an agreement, a 2-year, $75 million extension, Geno Smith and the Raiders. The contract has incentives that could push the total to $85.5 million and includes $66.5 million in guaranteed money. And CC, now Geno Smith contractually tied to Las Vegas through the 2027 season.
Yeah, this is a conscious decision by the Las Vegas Raiders. As Pete Carroll has insisted, this is not a quick fix at the quarterback position, but this is a multi-year solution. And Smalls, it makes me feel like we're now entering a new era of the NFL where teams are embracing the middle-class quarterback, right? For so long, it was you got to pay a quarterback at the very top of the market or you're not going to pay him at all. And he's going to be relegated to journeyman status. And now it seems like the quarterbacks in that $20 to $40 million range are starting to have a resurgence. We just saw what Justin Fields got from the New York Jets. We saw what Sam Darnold got from the Seattle Seahawks. Baker Mayfield making around $30 million a year. And now you've got Geno Smith, the next in line, with a new money average on his extension of $37.5 million. So Kirk Cousins could potentially be in that class of quarterbacks, considering him potentially getting moved from the Atlanta Falcons. We'll see where he lands. But I think there are general managers around the league that are comfortable going into a season at QB1 with the middle class of quarterback rather than making the consequential mistake of paying a quarterback that's good, elite quarterback money because of what it does to your team long term. So I think that's going to be a fascinating experiment to watch as we continue to move into the NFL season, whether or not these GMs that are opting for the middle class of quarterback can still contend at a high level.
I love that phrase, CC, the middle-class quarterback. It's almost like we can win with him. We don't have to win solely because of him quarterback.
Correct.
Which I love. And Geno Smith certainly fits that bill. He's somebody that can go into Las Vegas, plug in right away with Pete Carroll, and get them to a place where they can at least compete. But what was it about Vegas and Geno Smith that allowed him to want to play there? Our Adam Schefter, our senior NFL insider, was on NFL Live yesterday, and this is what he had to say.
Seattle sat down with Geno Smith, and it quickly became evident that the two sides were not going to be able to reach an agreement. I think Geno Smith had his eyes on Las Vegas. The Seahawks made him happy. They sent him to Las Vegas, which was willing to pay Geno Smith more than the Seahawks. The Seahawks go on to Sam Darnold, and with today's deal, because at this time of the year, everything is relative to the draft, I think this almost clinches the fact that the Las Vegas Raiders will bypass a quarterback in the first round. Maybe they revisit it in an early round later on, but it's hard to imagine that they go and give Geno Smith $75 million today and then turn around 3 weeks later and draft a quarterback in the first round. I don't think they're taking a page from the Falcons playbook in terms of the plays that they're going to run here.
But is it off the board, CC, that they would take a page out of the Falcons playbook? As Adam Schefter just outlined, when you give Geno Smith the contract you just gave him, the thought process would be they're going to bypass a quarterback in the first round. And Pete Carroll said that Geno Smith was an immediate fix at the position when he was at the league meeting earlier this week in Palm Beach. But he didn't rule out the possibility of drafting a quarterback in the draft later this month when we're going to be there in Green Bay, Wisconsin. So when you heard this news about Geno Smith getting an extension to stay in Vegas until 2027, did your mind go to the place of, oh, okay, well, Shedeur Sanders must be off the board for them?
No, it didn't. And listen, Shefty is as plugged in as anybody when it comes to the NFL, and I trust his read when it comes to most scenarios. But he mentioned it in passing at the end of his comments. The Atlanta Falcons paid Kirk Cousins, guaranteed him $100 million in March, and then went about the business of drafting Michael Penix Jr. with the top 10 pick last year. And it turned out to be the prudent thing to do because Penix started a handful of games at the end of the year, and he's their future franchise quarterback moving forward. So I think it worked out for Atlanta. They threw resources at a position of need, the most important position in the entire sport, and they were able to find an answer. Although it was a very expensive proposition in order to do so, when you got your franchise quarterback for the next decade plus, there's no amount of money, no amount of draft picks that teams wouldn't be willing to pay. All you got to do is see how desperate the Cleveland Browns were when they traded for Deshaun Watson once upon a time. So I don't think this decision to extend Geno precludes the Las Vegas Raiders from taking Shedeur Sanders, especially if Shedeur slides to them. If the Raiders are on the clock at 6 and Shedeur Sanders is still on the board, that's going to be a very difficult decision for General Manager John Spytek to make in passing on Shedeur Sanders. So we'll see what ends up happening. I would say it's more likely than not they take the best position player available. Ashton Genty has shown up on a lot of mock drafts to the Raiders at 6. But again, with that division, knowing that you're up against Justin Herbert, knowing that you're up against Patrick Mahomes, what we saw from Bo Nix in his rookie year paired with Sean Payton, you need firepower at the quarterback spot if you're going to contend, especially knowing the shape that Raiders roster is in. Mm-hmm. Geno, as good as he's been over the last several years, he's not going to allow you to see eye to eye with those other quarterbacks in the AFC West. And so for that reason alone, I would want to have a guy in the hopper that gives my team a higher ceiling, and that's the Shedeur Sanders effect if they were to draft him.
I thought the same thing, even though on the surface it would seem like, okay, we have this position locked up at least for a few years. I love your phrase, the middle class of quarterbacks. If you have the option in the draft to take a guy that you're familiar with, a guy that you think could bump you up to first class or bump you up to a different tax bracket, so to speak.
No doubt.
Especially for the future. And a guy that understands what it's like to play for a big-time brand, a guy who's not afraid of the spotlight, a guy who I think would work really well with Pete Carroll. That is going to be a very difficult decision for them to make. And if you do have success with Geno Smith, you're not going to be in a better position to draft a quarterback moving forward. This might be the best chance you have to get somebody who's a difference maker if things do pan out the way you anticipate they do, which means that you'll have a better record and a worse draft position moving forward.
Well, here's the other beautiful thing about giving Geno this extension. If you do draft the quarterback, there's zero pressure on that kid to play.
Yeah.
Because you just gave Geno Smith that money. And so I think a lot of people would say, oh, well, we've invested this in Geno. We don't have to play the young guy, even if the team struggles. We've seen Geno play winning football over the last couple of years. The Seattle Seahawks had a winning record. Seattle Seahawks have found themselves in the postseason with him as the starting quarterback. So I think that the contract takes the pressure off the Raiders. It takes the pressure off of Geno Smith. And if they were to draft a quarterback in the early rounds, it would take the pressure off of that kid because he doesn't have to play early. And quite frankly, the Raiders roster isn't ready to support a young quarterback, which is why you need Geno Smith. Let him take the slings and arrows. Let him deal with all of the lumps that come along with trying to rebuild a program from scratch in one of the most competitive divisions in all of football. And then a year or two down the road, you turn it over to a young guy when your team is in much better shape.
I wonder if there's a team outside the top 10 that's looking at this Geno extension that maybe had their eye on Shedeur Sanders, and they're thinking, maybe we should make a call. Let's see if we can jump up and get their pick.
I tell you what, if the Raiders pass on Shedeur Sanders at 6, that makes it a fascinating proposition for the New York Jets with the 7th overall pick.
Ooh, it sure does.
That makes it fascinating for the New York Jets. They got Justin Fields, they've got Jordan Travis, they've got Tyrod Taylor. But if you got Shedeur Sanders staring at you, you got to think long and hard about making that decision.
Well, we are going to get into a little game of something or nothing coming up next here on Unsportsmanlike. But
chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Mình sẽ tiếp tục hướng dẫn các bạn tô tượng. Tượng hôm nay của mình sẽ có tiêu đề là con sâu. Các bạn, hôm nay tượng của mình là con lợn. Bây giờ mình bắt đầu tô nhá. Đầu tiên là mình tô màu xanh.